I left a comment to my last blog post earlier this morning, September 5th, 2025, noting that I sold some stocks into the rally earlier this morning since I view the August jobs report as consistent with an increase in the odds of stagflation, which is not a positive for the stock market. No one can predict the future with accuracy, but my portfolio management style does require me to make an assessment of potential risk and adjust my asset mix and response, taking into account, importantly, my primary objectives being capital preservation with income generation, with far less emphasis on capital gains at my age and financial condition. The central question to ask yourself is what is causing the slowdown in job creation? The new jobs created in August was reported this morning by the BLS at only 22,000. June was revised again down, with the new number at minus 13,000. The U6 number rose to 8.1% from 7.9% in July. The U6 number can be found in Table A15 of the BLS report, and it measures the, quote, total unemployed plus all people marginally attached to the labor force plus total employed part-time for economic reasons as a percent of the civilian labor force plus all people marginally attached to the labor force, end of quote. It is an important number, and you don't want to see it go up. Trump and Republican politicians will not admit ever that their policies are causing problems in the U.S. labor market that I anticipate will accelerate in the coming months, along with higher inflation numbers as well, or what is generally described as a stagflation scenario developing. Consequently, they will take no steps whatsoever to address the actual causes. Having the U.S. government controlled by people who are untethered to facts is not helpful. It doesn't matter what party they are from or their ideology. Trump and his totally servile and controlled Republicans in the House and Senate will simply blame the Federal Reserve for the problems that Trump has created and will continue to create. Reducing the federal funds rate from the relatively historically benign range of 4.25 to 4.5%, particularly given the level of inflation, does not address the core causes of the developing stagnation, which includes the disruptions, uncertainties, supply chain problems, and price increases resulting from the Republican tariff taxes, the deportation of undocumented immigrants who perform jobs that Americans do not want, particularly in agriculture, and mass layoffs of government workers with other reductions in federal government spending. In the coming months, I am expecting a rise in unemployment, some months with negative job numbers and an increase in the inflation rate. Real GDP growth may turn negative in the 2025 fourth quarter or sometime in the 2025 first half. The odds of a recession in 2026 are increasing, in my opinion. I would not be surprised to see an annual CPI rate go over 5% sometime in late 2026. Reducing the federal funds rate is not going to cure those causes that are actually behind what is happening now in the economy, but may even aggravate them by reducing the amount of interest income available to millions of savers to support their spending without increasing or incurring more debt. The downside of lowering interest rates is rarely mentioned, but will cause less consumer spending among those most impacted by the lower interest income numbers as their disposable income shrinks. I noted in a comment posted yesterday to my last blog post that a per jobs report today would likely cause a bond rally, and that is in fact happening. It is understandable that institutional investors have become increasingly concerned about short-term rates declining or even plummeting and want to go further out in the maturity spectrum to lock in higher yields. I have been selling into the bond rallies by lowering my allocation of intermediate term corporate bonds, as I have noted in my last 5 blog posts, and that will continue for when I prepare and write my next blog post. There will be more sales to discuss. There are several reasons for this reduction in the intermediate term allocation to corporate bonds that I discussed in yesterday's comment. The most important reason is that a significant rise in inflation could easily result in those bonds going down in price, which I do not welcome. As investors are confronted with the reality of stagflation, of a stagflation scenario developing in full bloom, which could easily happen now, which will take time to become clearly evident to those investors. That result of lower, longer-term bond prices assumes that no Federal Reserve rate manipulation of the intermediate and long-term rates through another massive QE program. The Fed can and has in the past been able to reduce long-term rates below the inflation rate through abnormal monetary policies. One of the first examples was after World War II, when they kept the 10-year Treasury yield below 2.5%, even though inflation for some years was over 10%. Another reason is that I already have a significant allocation to longer-term bonds that existed prior to loading up on intermediate-term corporate bonds. I'm referring primarily to municipal bonds that I bought 5 to 10 years ago. Lastly, it is important to me that my income generation from short-term corporate bonds maturing over the next 3 to 4 years is already sufficient to meet my needs after taxes, and owning individual intermediate term corporate bonds with coupons of 5% to 5.5% bought at small discounts to par value only incrementally adds to what is already sufficient income generation from the shorter term corporate bonds. I'm heavily weighted in bonds maturing in 0 to 4 years, and I'm not selling those. And the income from those bonds and other income will provide sufficient money after taxes to pay all of my living expenses, with 30 to 40%, or maybe as high as 50% if there are no extraordinary expenses left over for additional investments. The August CPI report, which is scheduled for release on September 11th, is the next important release. It would probably upset bond investors some if the inflation report was hot.